Welcome everyone. Hello, my name is Kim Marie from the Evolutionary Astrology Network, and today I'm going to speak on coronavirus updates, public figures, and emerging trends. And so before we get started, I just want to quickly say, anybody who's followed the Evolutionary Astrology Network and has noticed that our YouTube channel was down, it came back up today. Mercury conjunct Uranus. It's been a long 6 months wait, so go check it out. If you see any problems, please email us or respond on YouTube and let us know. We just found this out with a few hours ago. And also, I will say right here with the title, when I decided to do this talk, I had planned to speak about, several of the public figures out there. But I'm going to limit it to one person who's really emerging to the top of the heap, if you want to call it that, in regards to this whole pandemic. And so we'll look more in depth on that chart because it's probably something you are already starting to be curious about, at least if you live in the United States. And let me get my slide thing going. And so, of course, I want to say thank you, international listeners. I live in the United States, and so some of this will have a perspective from the US, but we will also work with the forecasting trends, knowing that they will be activated all over on a global basis. I have been monitoring the first three sentences that you see on your screen for about the last month. Every day I get up and I do the math. And for those of you who don't know it, the United States has 4% of the world's population, which is currently at about 7.8 billion people. We have 32% of the COVID-19 cases worldwide. We have 26.7% of the COVID-19 deaths worldwide. We have went the last month from about 30 to 32% of the world's cases. And the last month I think we started out at about 22% of the world's cases. And in the last few days, we have been creeping up to 27%. I keep coming back to this statistic again and again and again and going, oh my gosh, if you don't know this about the United States chart, I'll show you this with the next slide. Transiting Pluto is balsamic, the United States Pluto. We're going to have our first soul return, Pluto conjunct Pluto in 2022. And so here's that Capricornian breakdown of all the structures. And so it boggles the mind. How can the world's richest country fail so badly with its citizens' health? As you can see on the screen, we have a very expensive for-profit healthcare system that we, on average, our healthcare costs in the United States are twice as much as the average of first world nations. We have a lack of universal health care. We're a mishmash of mostly employer-based health care that still falls a lot on the individual's pocketbook. And of course, we've had some things done in the last 3 years of this current Republican administration that has really just decimated anything we do to address any pandemics, no matter where they pop up across the world. I also thought you might find it interesting to just look. They are starting to publish here in the United States the mortality rates by race or ethnicity. And you can see on your screen that it is for every 100,000 people, 11 Asian deaths, 28.4 Black, 11.3 Latino, 10.7 white, all that averaged out to 17.7. That's what makes up that 26.7% of the deaths. Here in this country, it is hitting the poor. It is hitting the people of non-white races and ethnicity. And it is also hitting the immigrants. I happen to live in a state, South Dakota, that had one of the first meat processing hotspots, where half of our state's coronavirus cases have been found in one meat processing facility in our state. And so there's a lot of inequality that is going on, probably not only in the US. I'm not as familiar as other countries in regards to how their racial breakdowns are, but this is going to be a pandemic that really hits the poorest among us. Of course, it will affect those who are elderly or impaired with various health issues. And it's really going to be exposing, as we finish up Pluto in Capricorn, just how unequal some of this healthcare is, no matter where in the world you live. So I wanted to one more time again show everybody the chart for the United States. I use the Gemini rising chart. However, I have a tendency to always speak to July 4th, 1776, and state that no matter which chart for that date you use, you will find all the slower moving aspects to just be basically the same. The only thing that will change is houses. What I wanted to point out is we are just starting here in the United States, transiting Pluto opposing Mercury, as you see on your screen, 5 times over the next 2 years before it gets to its Pluto-Pluto conjunction. So I think as this year follows through with the United States having its once every 4-year presidential election, we're going to really see healthcare emerge as an issue for us in this country. I am of the perspective that the coronavirus situation is not going to go away soon. I, in fact, think it will be with us at least for the next 18 months through the nodal axis shift into Gemini Sag. I think this will be true for all of us anywhere across the world. The previous administration, which was Barack Obama, when he was president for 8 years, his administration did a lot to work with other countries and the World Health Organization and the United Nations to really try to be proactive for whenever the next pandemic comes along, because it's never an if, it's always a when. It's always to what degree. And so here we are back having these conversations, Pluto opposing Mercury, as Pluto approaches itself, as you see here on your screen, going, how will we address this as a collective country? How will we rebirth ourselves? In the midst of that, we also have transiting Neptune in its own sign of Pisces, getting ready to make in opposition to itself. And before that, though, 3 last quarter squares to Mars in Gemini. And as a matter of fact, Neptune goes retrograde right about the time Venus goes direct, the end of June. And Neptune goes retrograde 1 minute off of its square to Mars. So Neptune, throughout almost the entire month of June, will literally be squatting on this square to Mars in Gemini. So as you'll see when we move through, this freedom individually and corporately and economically with businesses versus taking care of the least of us and following facts and science is going to really be part of that Mars and Gemini debate. I think the fact that Neptune is activating this Mars-Neptune square natally for the United States means, again, this coronavirus is not going to leave the headlines very fast. If you think you have, if you're tired of hearing about the virus, pace yourself, take some deep breaths, because it will be quite a while. Now, here's a tidbit for you. I used to converse a lot with the late astrologer, Robert Gover, and he has a book out called Time and Money. Time and Money. The second edition of it was published just before his death in 2014. And he was one of the astrologers that said, whenever outer planets activate the Mars-Neptune square, the US goes through an economic downturn. We now have 1 in 5 individuals applying for unemployment here in the United States. We passed the 30 million mark of people unemployed in the last 4 weeks. So Neptune's going to cause a lot of confusion over how we go forward with this. Neptune opposing Neptune, we're going to have all that ideology that comes in from Neptune in Virgo. I'm right, you're wrong, whether we are talking about this from a religious perspective or even a science and technology perspective. It also can really expose how this country does not have a healthy immune system collectively or with its individuals, regardless of how much money we spend per capita. And then added to this, transiting Saturn is going to go over the natal US Pluto. I'll get my little highlighter for you. Whoops, excuse me. I don't, oh, maybe not. I'll use my mouse. It's this circle right here, transiting Saturn over the soul of our country. And then transiting Jupiter is going to oppose this natal Mercury. So this back and forth over who's right, who's wrong is going to combine with all of these outer planets. And it'll be interesting to see what choices we make going forward. I'll speak more to this as some charts come along here. But I also just want to briefly revisit the fact that both Jupiter and Saturn are going into Aquarius. I've stated this earlier for EA Zoom. Saturn in Aquarius from March 21st through July 1st is going to be the timing of the worst outbreak. And then it's going to go back in the end of this year and be there 2 full years, 2021, 22. Jupiter is going to be in Aquarius most of 21, except for a couple of months. This can be the second wave of the COVID-19 outbreak. It will also be some of the timings with Jupiter and Saturn of how we come up with vaccines or various drugs that can shorten the intensity of the COVID-19 symptoms, or perhaps even prevention with the vaccines. Again, these statements right here with Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius is going to be accurate no matter where you live across the planet. We're all going to be experiencing Saturn in Aquarius as it is now, and then both of them through most of next year, 2021. I'll have a few more slides about what will it look like with some of this Aquarian energy. But I want to just point out to you that the word contagion belongs to the Aquarius archetype, and I have 2 examples on the screen. The psychology of a contagion is the spread of a behavior, attitude, or emotion from person to person or group to group through suggestion, propaganda, rumor, or imitation. You can easily just look around you and see how this happens on various subjects, not just whether or not we're speaking to the coronavirus, but how we feel about voting rights or healthcare or gun control, or pick your subject with whatever country you happen to live in. But contagion also has a definition physically with actual diseases, and it's the communication of the disease from one person to another with close contact, which is what we have going on with a coronavirus. Now, we have just experienced the nodal axis moving into Gemini Sag. The North Node is moved from Cancer to Gemini. The South Node has moved from Capricorn to Sagittarius. The Gemini Sag polarity in general rules the respiratory system. I always like to say that on a physical basis, Gemini rules the breath in and Sag rules the breath out. And they go back and forth and back and forth. but they also work energetically. Gemini rules gathering and taking in informations and facts and details and opinions and the propaganda. And Sag rules having to make sense of it all and then releasing what is not relevant or whatever does not fit in with the perspective of our belief system. These two are going to combine both with the time period in which we see COVID-19 wreaking its havoc on planet Earth. This is one of my main planetary transits in which I say we're looking at a good 18 months here yet before we'll really see this start to ease off, if we get back to any sense of what the old normal was. These planets going into Aquarius may say we're going to have new social normals from here on out. We'll see how they play out country to country. But we will deal with this also emotionally, mentally, and spiritually. And the nodal axis is the nodes of the moon, so it always has a strong emotional flavor to it. And so it's going to behoove us to really reach out for some of the broadest understandings of truth that we can understand and take in so that we can calm that nervous system, because Gemini has co-rulership of the nervous system in general, along with Uranus. And so I have a resource for you at the end of this hour that we'll look at. But throughout history, we've had viral pandemics, and many, many times they have occurred when the nodal axis is in Gemini Sag. Doesn't matter where the north node or south node is according to the signs. So quickly, and this is coming from another astrologer that I have sourced down at the bottom of the page if you'd like to read the article he did on this. This is just listing recent pandemics that were viral. Pandemics can be bacterial as well. The Black Death or bubonic plague was bacterial, Yersinia pestis, way back in the middle 1400s. But recent viral pandemics, Spanish flu, SARS, and MERS that you see on your screen were all coronaviruses. In general, we look at a coronavirus as spreading from animal to human, and then mutating to spread from human to human quite rapidly. And because we've never had exposure to it, our immune system is attacked. We have not built up that herd immunity that you hear spoken about. Now, when we have the nodal axis transing Gemini Sagittarius or Sagittarius Gemini, it does not mean we will always have a viral pandemic. No one can predict the degree of intensity, and a lot of times our human activity and our human responses account for a lot in regards to how much it's going to break out and how intense it's going to be. You can compare the United States to Germany, that has one of the best universal health care systems in the world and one of the best in the European Union. And they went after it gun-ho from the very beginning with all of their shelter-in-place rules, with developing one of the first testings that the United States refused to adopt. They sent their early tests to tell whether or not you had the COVID-19. They sent it to the WHO, and the World Health Organization was sending it out all over the place. And I want to say that might have been back in January. And so there's a country that really responded quite fast and was a lot different than, say, its next door neighbors in Spain or Italy. So we as individual countries and humans can have a lot to do with where these viral pandemics go. With the United States wanting to really open up in the month of May, there's a lot of fear in the scientific community of, we haven't started flattening the curve in this country. Before I came on, I think we were hitting about 62,000 deaths. So we've already went through our latest models of 60,000. Are we going to be on our way to 100,000? How much further will it go? Now, I also just want to point out that these pandemics can occur with other planetary stelliums. Many times you'll see Jupiter with Pluto or Jupiter with Saturn. Got both of those going on. And there are also other various transits and planetary configurations. I do think that this Gemini Sag is quite a strong theme, though. And in addition to that, as you see here, we have Venus in Gemini for 4 months, which is the longest it spends in any sign of the zodiac, which it does about once every year and a half when it goes through its retrograde cycle. You can see the dates on your screen here, and its retrograde is entirely in Gemini as well. So even just through these next few months, and its retrograde is contained entirely within Saturn transiting Aquarius, so we can look at the Venus retrograde to exacerbate the transmission of COVID-19 through travel. Gemini, nodal axis, Gemini Sag. How are we going to open up traveling again? Some areas will be strict. Others will be the Wild West, which is kind of where I live. And of course, close contact comes with Gemini. So will we barely flatten the wave in some countries before we head into the second one? Well, we see some countries just continue to expand. There's a lot of fear down in South America because the Brazilian president is, doing a lot of what Donald Trump did back in January and February and just ignoring everything and not paying any attention, not putting out any, facts or rules or taking it seriously. So this Venus retrograde is really going to work with how our values are going to shift both individually and collectively with freedom versus safeguarding. We'll see how it turns out. And of course, with Gemini, which is communications in all its many forms, we already are finding there's so much coming out there in what we will call facts versus opinions. Now, Gemini, Venus retrograde in Gemini points to Sagittarius. One more time, I would invite all of you to go deeply within and search within yourself of what is true for you and how it is best for you to be self-responsible through these times, wherever it is you may live. I also want to point out, we're starting to see astrologers speak about this in the news as well. Because we are having these 5 conjunctions between Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto, which you see in color on your screen here, they are traveling so close together that they are going stationary retrograde and stationary direct, all within a few weeks of each other this year. And you can see that Jupiter's retrograde cycle is contained within Saturn's, and both of those are contained within Pluto. You can also see on your screen here how I've been labeling this retrograde time period as the freedom rebellions begin. And this is what's happening for us in the United States in various degrees between what we will call liberal and conservative states in our country and those that are just opening it up without any testing whatsoever. We still lag behind in testing. We've barely tested 1% of our population here in the United States, and you can't get tests on demand unless you have a lot of money, or you have to go through a health provider to get a test right now at this point. Hopefully that's going to change in this month of May. But I do think that with these planets going retrograde, retrograde planets, they're the rebellers in general. And so we've got all this backlash of stay at home and all the economic concerns that are going on everywhere. Will we see when they turn stationary direct, and up in the Northern Hemisphere in particular, a second wave began because we go back into what we would call our normal flu season with influenza A, B, etc. Time will tell. I don't like the word prediction. I prefer the word forecast. Here's the timing, here's the themes, but how it's going to turn out is going to be up to us individually and collectively as groups of people. Here's a chart I'm going to work with tonight. This figure is emerging out there in the news all over the place. As we speak, he is being interviewed on CNN, a cable news network channel, if you want to hit record and watch that. This gentleman is Bill Gates. We actually have a time on him. He has his birth is an A listing in the Rodden system. Data, October 28th, 1955, 10 p.m., Seattle, Washington. Over the past 20 years, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has given close to $250 million in charitable grants to companies in which the foundation holds corporate stocks and bonds, yet it gets tax breaks for the charitable donations it takes money from. I will show you a little more information on this article in the next slides coming up. I just want to briefly point out to you how activated his chart is. And I have found a lot of public figures as I was looking through different charts to see who should I speak to. There are a lot of public figures who have Gemini Sag planets in their charts. For those of you who are not aware of this, Donald Trump has a north node in Gemini and a south node in Sag, right about these degrees. I think his are 20 degrees or something like that. He will have a nodal axis return, his fourth, just days before the US presidential election. I already wonder with Bill Gates having this nodal axis natally, if around our October-November time period, there will be more things breaking in the news with him. All of the funding that he's doing for a vaccine may come out. I'll address the ethics of vaccination here shortly. This transit chart, the outer biwheel, is drawn up for this morning. Here's Venus slowing down to go stationary retrograde right on his south node. And he is being given a voice all across the world. The Gates Foundation is the largest private foundation in the world. Almost $60 billion in assets. And no matter how many tens of billions of dollars it gives away, it keeps going and going and going. Most of the Gates Foundation investments are in chemical agriculture, specifically GMOs, but beyond that, pharmaceutical drugs and vaccines, and they are an advocate for private charter schools at the expense of public schools. So you can see there's a real strong focus here on not only technology, of course, Microsoft founder, what else would you expect? But just in regards to chemicals and drugs in the realm of health and wellness. We'll come back to this chart. I want to show you a couple of things. Though the Gates family and the Gates Foundation have given away tens of billions of dollars, their assets have continued to grow, raising questions about the long-term influence of billionaire philanthropy in American politics. And you can see on your screen here how his personal wealth in green and his foundation's wealth in red have just continued to increase in time. It was back in the early 2000s that Microsoft lost a suit in that it was acting as a monopoly and forcing everybody to use the Microsoft operating system in so many of its computers and things that it sold. And Bill Gates's name really suffered a lot of bad influence then. And so he created this foundation, yes, to give his money away, but also to create a new name for himself. And that's what you're seeing a lot right now out there in the corporate and consensus media. Now, here is the conflict of interest he has with all the pharmaceutical companies. These are all pharmaceutical companies that his foundation has given money to. There's the amounts that he has given. And of course, he owned stock in each of these companies. So a really good article recently was in the Nation magazine, and you see the link there, and I've given you the title of the article in bold and its date, and you can go read this for yourself. But and it's just the conflict of interest he has, because not just in the health and wellness, but everywhere he tends to give money, it goes into fields where he owns company stock. And so he benefits from giving away with his charity. The nation has uncovered close to $2 billion in tax-deductible charitable donations to private companies that Gates Foundation has given. A foundation that gives a charitable grant to a company that it partially owns and stands to benefit from financially would seem like an obvious conflict of interest. So this story is also starting to come out, nodal axis in Gemini Sag, Venus in Gemini, getting ready to go retrograde on the south node. We're going to see that duality here. Is he a saint or a paria, or whatever the word is, however you pronounce it? Dr. McCullough did a excerpt from this Nation article, and then he added on more information and more details. I would recommend you, if you want, read this article as well, and how Dr. McCullough feels he's really pretty dangerous for the planet. For those of you international listeners, there's a lot in the United States where the billionaires are giving their money away so they don't pay taxes. And so if they're paying in less taxes, then it becomes more of a collective interest, because there's less resources going in to the collective coffers to handle something like a global pandemic that comes along that really needs to be dealt with more on a national level for any country than locally. Dr. McCullough says, Gates has gone on record saying the U.S. needs disease surveillance and a national tracking system that could involve vaccine records embedded on our bodies, such as an invisible ink quantum dot tattoos described in a Science Translational Medicine paper. You can find resources to go find more on that from Dr. McCullough's article, if you would like to. And so I'm not here to judge Bill Gates, nor am I saying that his foundation doesn't do great work. I am doing the Gemini duality when it comes to the whole vaccination thing. I have a very close family member who lost his son to bacterial meningitis at 2 years old. It was pretty devastating for him, and his soul really went through a dark period in regards to that. And so it opened my eyes a lot, in that I think the best of our worlds would be the blend of traditional and the alternative. And of course, alternative methods tend to be a lot more accepting or commingling of traditional. It's a slower haul to get the traditional scientific world to open up. Dr. Fossey, by the way, used to be a proponent of megadoses of vitamin C until Bill Gates put him on his COVID-19 panel a few months ago. He rescinded his endorsement of vitamin C. Personally, I have a 24-year-old stepson who I have helped raise since he was 6. He's never had a vaccination in his life. So I've walked both paths. I am someone who has been very immersed in alternative healthcare. And yet I am not going to blanketly say that vaccines are not helpful or good. You'll see in a little bit here, I think it is an individual choice. But I do want to point out that Bill Gates has engaged in very little nutritional education, diet, exercise, and rest, what we're all starting to become familiar with in first world countries. Nor has he invested much into low-cost solution to either world hunger or global pandemics. And there is a wealth of information in that area of low-cost solutions for global pandemics on Dr. McCullough's website if you care to go search for that. I think that Bill Gates will continue to grow in influence. We are looking at transiting Saturn, going 3 times over his natal Chiron with health and healing, 7th house here over 2020. Jupiter is literally, as we speak, going into his 7th house, and he just seems to be all over the news media right now talking about his foundation and the 100 million he's given in the fight to COVID-19, 3/5 of which is directed toward vaccines and drugs. So Jupiter's going to go 3 times over this descendant. Pluto is going to follow along here in 2021. Gemini will make 3 passages over his south node. Uranus is just finishing up, going back and forth over his natal sun in Scorpio. This is a powerful individual, and I think he has more power than Donald Trump. I also think maybe he has more brain cells too. He is really probably going to turn out to be the most powerful figure in the world through the rest of this year as we look at how we're going to deal with the coronavirus. He is funding vaccine studies in 2 locations or 4, I can't remember, across the United States. He is not funding a study to embed chips down in South Africa. That is actually fake news. He did, out of that 100 million, 20 million of it is going directly to Africa and the Asian Peninsula to help them with various testings and PPEs, the personal protection equipment, and other things. And so again, I am not saying that this gentleman or his foundation are not doing good. I think I'm speaking more to that consensus world, that consensus state of consciousness, where 7 out of 10 are just so influenced by the distortions of patriarchal principles. He could be sincerely thinking in his soul that he's doing something good. But those of us in broader perspectives are saying, and we have a little bit of concern that those separating forces out there in the universe are seeing a way to really undermine some of our individual rights and choices all across the planet here. We'll see how all of this turns out, but you've got his chart to work with. You probably have other things flashing for you. We can come back to his chart if we want to. I want to get through a few more slides for us. What we're going to see in 2020 with this Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto stellium, their conjunctions, and the mechanism of the coronavirus is the weak links in every country, from healthcare to economic policies to laws governing things like mail-in ballots and abortions to how we bail out rich corporations to how we take care of the least of us. All of in general, what we will call these patriarchal distortions are exposed everywhere. And how are we going to collectively respond? Are we going to try and suppress information? Are we going to try and tell our citizens nothing has happened? Are we going to go overboard in wanting to put chips in our citizens or require them to have vaccination papers before they can go to a public event? It's going to be all across the spectrum, from those that search for what is as factual as possible to those that are using that Pluto and Capricorn and, Jupiter and Capricorn opportunity to really clamp down on laws or even actually ignore them. It will be individual to all of us, and it behooves all of us as individual citizens to stand up for whatever we see as right. And of course, as these planets go into Aquarius, to activate socially as we want to move forward. So the majority of citizens worldwide are going to face the choice of scientific facts, North Node in Gemini, versus the religious and or political dogmas, South Node in Sagittarius, over the next 18 months. And one of the things that we're going to be looking at with that South Node in Sag is, can we shed some of these religious dogmas? Can we shed some of these political dogmas that exist out there? Here's the statement that Lysol had to put out in the United States last week when Donald Trump, in one of his daily news conferences that then all of a sudden ended and are on a hit and miss level right now. Nobody seems to be able to quite bring him to rein him in, so to speak, verbally. We're not going to be able to do that with these with the nodal axis in Gemini Sag now. But Don was even suggesting, injection and ingestion of disinfectants, and the scientists, everybody in the United States was just mouth standing open, so to speak. But that's just one of the most extreme examples of what we are going to be looking at as time goes by. And in the United States, Donald Trump accepts no responsibility. I saved you from his chart this time. It's always somebody else's fault. And so, third, consensus denial. Probably one of the biggest things that we all are going to have to work our way through is to vaccinate or not. For me, it comes down to the freedom to choose. And some countries will allow us to choose, and other countries will go mandatory with it. And I think that possibility of the mandatory vaccinations, or walking around with a vaccination certificate, or the chips, or the quantum tattoos, that's going to increase as Jupiter moves through Aquarius next year, 21, Saturn fully in Aquarius through all of 21, 22. And then, of course, Pluto goes into Aquarius. And I guessed, hold on a second, I got a little thing here where I quickly look this up. Apologies for that. I don't have, yeah, I was right, 2024, 2044. Pluto has a 20-year transit through Aquarius. Get ready. I just think that, again, it's quite possible that there's going to be a variety of countries that are really going to start looking at this, because with viruses, we are always behind the curve. We can't create a one-size-fits-all, and we can't create a vaccine in 2 weeks. It is typically minimum 12 to 18 months, even though we'll probably do it faster. So one more time, I sit on the side of free choice and allowing all of us the freedom as individuals and as parents to choose what works for us according to our beliefs, according to our knowledge and how we look at the facts. Here's the details of the Gates Foundation that has just in, I don't know, the last few months, I didn't get the date on that, committed $100 million to COVID-19. Behind the United States, the Gates Foundation is the second largest contributor to the World Health Organization. Gates sits on their board, and they, in many ways, can take marching orders from them. I think the World Health Organization is doing a tremendous job, but it comes down on the side of vaccinations. And yes, there's a time and a place for them. And there you can see, as I spoke, where the rest of it's going. But here's the little factoid on Dr. Fauci, who's the one who's on our news conferences with Donald Trump every day if you're international. He's the one who leads our National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Bill Gates put him on his leadership council board that is in charge of distributing this $100 million. And so there's already been articles in our country of how there is some co-opting going on here, and who's singing whose tune from the United States to who in regards to the Gates Foundation. So here's why I am of the personal perspective that it has to be a free choice. In evolutionary astrology, we have what we call the evolutionary states, and these are evolutionary states of consciousness. And this is something that we observe and correlate. A chart will not tell you gender. A chart will not tell you the evolutionary state of consciousness. You have to interact with the person involved to observe where their soul is coming from. And so here's what we more or less loosely find as to statistics, regardless of the country you reside in or your race or ethnicity. There are minor exceptions with ethnicities that in indigenous cultures that have not been westernized. They tend to be a little more in the natural law states. But approximately 7 out of 10 souls exist in consensus, cowbells around their neck. They tell me to take a vaccine, I'll take it. They tell me to eat bird shit, I'll eat it. This is where the vaccination arena exists. This is the laws of any country. And this is why evolution tends to take so slow. And this is why we have these cataclysmic peaks of evolution every so often to wake us up and move us beyond resistance. For some of these souls, this is a good thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing. You know, we pretty much eradicated measles in the United States. A lot of our childhood diseases. I would be of an advocation that we don't necessarily give them out to a baby at 6 weeks old. Children don't have their immune system developed. Apologize for that. I'm home alone, so the door's open. Children don't have their immune systems fully developed till about age 2. And so I would be in favor of having more vaccinations after age 2 in childhood and allowing them to move through creating their own boosting of your immune system. And of course, this is most famously done through breast milk. About 2 out of 10 souls, individuated state. This is where we really want our own choice. Don't fence me in on every area, not just health and wellness. Approximately 1 out of 10 souls spirituated, understanding those timeless universal principles that have always existed. And of course, individuated and spirituated, more in line with holistic solutions or combinations of. Now, the mixture of traditional and alternative choices can exist in all 3 states of consciousness, even though it is more well known in individuated and spirituated. But here's what I want to remind you of. Even though 70% is consensus, if you look at your screen here, this is the smallest circle. And this is one of the things that it's been a bit of a real detail for me as an evolutionary astrologer to point out that these evolutionary states are not based upon better than or less than. They are expanding states of awareness. And what I always say is for those of us individuating and spirituating, we still must make peace with the consensus world. Very few of us can exist outside the consensus world. If you're producing 100% of your food, if you are off the grid, yeah, you're outside of the consensus world. But how many of you in the United States were scrambling for toilet paper? How many of you in other countries were trying to find your protection, personal protection equipment, your PPEs? We have to understand that consensus to move beyond it. And of course, in doing that, well, I'm going to end here. Coronaviruses are single-strand RNA that are encased in a lipid, which is a fat molecule. And so what the CDC and our government's consensus say about washing your hands, just plain old dish soap, it is the best thing. The last time you washed a greasy pan in hot sudsy water to break up all the fat molecules and clean the pan, that's what you're doing when you wash your hands. Now, I've been using hydrogen peroxide in our household, a 3% solution. You buy it that way, we just pour it into the spray bottle, and that's how we clean our counters and our surfaces. It's how I clean my mother-in-law's food before I let her touch the bags that we brought home from the grocery store, let alone any of the products themselves. It's not as caustic as alcohol or bleach, and it works fairly fast compared to vinegar. Some of the emerging natural supplements, I mentioned this before, vitamin D, you actually have to be tested to be greater than 60 nanograms per milliliter in your blood. Usually if you take 2,000 IUs daily, you can get yourself up to 30, 40, long-term, maybe even 50 IUs daily. You may need more than that for a period of time to get it up past 60, which is some of the emerging research. Most of the science in the US is 30 nanograms, and it's just not enough for disease prevention. High doses of vitamin C, and the rule is taking it more frequently throughout the day, and you take it until you have loose bowels, and then you know when you're getting too much. What they're also showing is that if you are COVID positive, your body will digest, assimilate, and process more vitamin C than normal. So if you're COVID positive by some chance and you're asymptomatic, you can go through high doses of vitamin C, doesn't matter which form, until, again, loose bowels and helping your system to create its own energetic immunity. And of course, the flavonoid, which is part of the C complex, quercetin, is something that you can take daily. Some are saying take it with zinc. I've also read that it's not necessary. Another supplement that's really emerging out there to be more than helping you sleep is melatonin. And so I'll speak to that in just one more moment. Neptune, here it is. Neptune rules the immune system, the endocrine system, and the pineal gland, the master gland, which secretes melatonin. And so melatonin is a hormone that regulates our circadian rhythms to be awake and to sleep. Our production decreases with age. It also is affected by artificial lighting. Those of you who live in big cities, or you stay up at night with your electronic devices, TV, computer, smartphone, whatever it is, not sleeping with those devices in the bedroom is so important. They are finding that melatonin works to support and boost the immune system. It helps with heart disease. It helps cut down on inflammation. Just like vitamin D was a real big buzz about 5, 6, 7 years ago, melatonin is really emerging to greater and greater understanding of all the things that it helps with. Ta-da! Neptune in Pisces. Some are even saying that it does help fight the coronavirus if you're exposed. I listed a few immune support nutrients in regards to vitamins and minerals and herbs. I've been a long-term advocate of herbs. Herbs are my medicines. I've taken astragalus root for decades. I grow elderberry, lots of those. But again, main thing is nothing replaces a healthy diet, exercise, and rest. Now, I have an acquaintance who sent me an article, or actually a YouTube video, on just 10 ways emotionally, mentally, spiritually to move from fear and drama in the midst of the coronavirus. And so I share that with you. And then briefly, I've been involved in an energetic balancing work for 2 decades. We have 11 coronavirus balancing frequencies that we've discovered since last December for humans, canines, and felines. You can find information on that. Last slide. Yesterday is history. Tomorrow is a mystery. Today is a gift of God, Goddess, which is why we call it the present. So I hope you found this information helpful. I'm open to questions. You can email me if you have questions as well afterwards, and I'll do my best to answer. I thank EA Zoom for always allowing me to show up and share my perspective on a variety of astrological subjects. I wish you all well, because again, the nodal axis in Gemini Sag, this is not going to go away very fast. We are going to evolve into learning how to have new social distancing. It'll come in a variety of ways. But we are also getting a wake-up call to really pay attention to the temple of our soul, our body, and having as healthy of a system or temple as we can through diet, exercise, and rest. All right.
Okay, thank you so much, Kim Marie. That was fantastic. Lots of great information. And
Thank you.
looking forward to seeing you next time. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, honey. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.